Welcome back to Inside the Issues. I'm Alex Cohen. It has become the most expensive initiative in California's history. Companies like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash have funneled nearly $200 million into Proposition 22. If approved, Prop 22 would exempt these companies from the state's incredibly controversial labor law, commonly known as AB 5. As part of our ongoing coverage, Decision 2020, the SoCal Impact, we break this ballot measure down now with Lauren Hepler, who covers California's economy for the website CalMatters. Lauren, it's great to have you back.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, so we could spend all day talking about AB5. We've done entire hour-long episodes on it, but basically it's this new law that really codifies who can be considered an independent contractor and who is considered an employee. And basically this made a lot more people move over from that independent contractor, freelancer category into employee category, where then you have to get things like benefits, and there's a lot more rules and regulations. The big gig companies have really balked at this, and this is how we got to Prop 22. Lauren, explain for us, if approved, what exactly would Prop 22 do?
You're exactly right. Prop 22 is all about this issue of classification, who can be considered a contract worker and who's a full-time employee. So as it stands now, current state law would say gig companies do have to comply with AB5 and pay their workers the statewide minimum wage, plus overtime, healthcare, benefits like paid family leave. If Prop 22 were to pass, that would create an entirely new framework for drivers who work for food delivery or ride-hailing companies. So Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, Postmates, those are the big financial backers of the measure. And they say, instead, let's pay drivers 120% of minimum wage and let them accrue some healthcare subsidies and write off some expenses. But that would all be based on something called engaged time, which is only when you have a passenger or an order in the car. And studies by both business and labor groups have showed that would mean that about 30% of the time when drivers are on apps waiting for work would remain unpaid.
And you could see where on the surface this would be something that all of these tech companies would want to get behind, because I'm assuming it's a lot less expensive for them to put workers into this new system of engaged time than making them full-fledged employees. How do the drivers themselves feel about it? Because from what I'm hearing out there, it's a really mixed bag on this front.
Yeah, there's a lot of really heated opinions on this. I talked to one driver who I thought had kind of a good overarching view of what the current system is. He was based down in LA. His name is Ben Valdez. And he said, really right now, driving for Uber or Lyft is like going to Vegas. Some days he'll have a great 10-hour shift and make $400 if he's got a lot of long rides, people going to airports. But other days he'll find himself at 2 o'clock in the morning just kind of refreshing and be like, wow, I only made $3 an hour. So he's much more in the camp of, if I'm dedicating my time, I should be sure of the benefits and have the stable pay. But that's not how all drivers feel. I've talked to others who say, for me, the key thing is being to jump on and make fast cash when I need to. I talked to another driver in San Jose who, during the Black Lives Matter protest earlier this summer, he said, I would gig during the day, work for Instacart, and make $150, $175 during the day. And that allowed him as a freelance photographer to go out and shoot the protests at night. So it really just does depend on kind of your individual circumstances. But obviously both campaigns are trying to say the drivers are on our side.
Yeah, I know, which is fascinating. They've also, Lauren, I've been fascinated by how they have campaigned. I've heard of DoorDash actually giving yes on Prop 22 bags to restaurants so that when people get their meals, they get like yes on 22 bags. And I've received, because I have used Uber and Lyft, I've gotten all sorts of emails. Talk about the campaigning themselves and how these big gig economy companies have really been able to push their message into the lives of people who use these services.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, this campaign is uncharted territory. These are massive technology companies that are using all of the resources at their disposal, both to talk to the drivers directly and to consumers like you and me. Actually, one of the things that's been interesting in the past week is we saw a lawsuit filed on behalf of some drivers who are affiliated with labor groups opposed to Prop 22, but they said this amounts to coercion in some cases. They said that the drivers being asked to support the measure on video or in text messages or in surveys they say under the threat of having their work reduced if they don't support the measure is actually illegal. So that's something that we'll likely see the courts decide. There's also been some questions about the mailers that are being used in this campaign, and specifically how the gig companies have used nonprofit status to do those. So down the stretch, there's been a lot of questions about the campaign tactics here.
And while we're talking about all things legal, there was also a legal decision that came down late last week that could have some impact on Prop 22 as well. What happened there?
We got a really highly anticipated court decision from a state appeals court late last week, that said Uber and Lyft really need to stop dragging their feet essentially on complying with this new state law, AB5, that would require workers to be classified as employees. So what that means is that if Prop 22 doesn't pass, there's going to be really no more debating in the court system, at least, whether these companies should be subject to the law or that sort of thing. That path has kind of now been exhausted. So it really raises the stakes even higher for how voters decide on Prop 22.
Lauren, let's talk a little bit about who has come out in strong support against the Ubers, the Lyfts, the DoorDash, the Postmates, the Instacarts. Who's saying no on Prop 22, besides some of the drivers you mentioned who say, no, we were kind of cool with AB5.
Mm-hmm. It's really an interesting new mix of labor groups here. You've got some of the old school California Labor Federation, SEIU, kind of the entrenched labor groups that you would expect to be opposed to the measure, but you've also got this new wave of gig worker advocacy groups. There's one called Gig Workers Rising, Rideshare Drivers United. And so in a lot of ways, this has kind of become a litmus test for how effectively labor groups can organize workers who are employed in the technology sector, which we've also seen a bit on the white collar side with things like the Google walkout and Facebook employees speaking out. So I think that's something to watch in terms of ripple effects beyond this campaign too.
And another thing that I think we should watch for ripple effects beyond this campaign is, as I understand it, there is something within Prop 22 because, long story short, ballot measures here in California, some people come together, they think, hey, we should write a new law, they put it out to voters, but there's always, something in the system that allows things to get undone. We're seeing that right now with Prop 16, which, if passed, would undo Prop 209, which was passed long ago. So here in Prop 22, there is a 7/8 clause. Explain this for us.
So our political reporter calls this the super majority clause.
Yeah.
And what it means is that there's a very, very high bar for the state legislature to make changes later to Prop 22. A lot of people say it's, practically speaking, politically impossible, even though California is this dark blue state. And it's been interesting to see the Yes on 22 campaign down the stretch did make a sizable $2 million donation to the California Republican Party. So definitely some partisan angles in play here. And the other thing that comes up is often folks say, well, I think I want to vote for Prop 22 because AB5 is already a mess and it needs to be amended. Thinking that it will be easy to also fix Prop 22 after the fact, but because of this very high bar, that's maybe not as straightforward as you would expect.
I gotta say, it's just so fascinating to me because the word that I keep thinking about is disrupt, right? The Ubers and the Lyfts of the world came along and they really disrupted a lot of the systems as we knew them, right? But there is another disruptor to think about here when it comes to Prop 22, and that is the coronavirus pandemic. And I'm just curious in your reporting, because obviously Prop 22 was in the works before coronavirus hit, but with so many people unemployed, with so much of our society here in California and across the country relying on things like Instacart and DoorDash, do you feel like that changed the nature of the discussion around this ballot measure at all?
Absolutely. On the labor side, you have unions and gig worker groups who are saying this pandemic makes it clearer than any other sort of course of events could have that these essential labor protections, like paid sick days in particular, are necessary, and that it's too precarious for workers to try to get by without them. But on the flip side, it's been interesting also down the home stretch of the campaign, the Yes on 22 side has really been saying, hey, we provide on-demand fast cash that other industries do not. And in fact, they've even been saying we provide a safety net that the state of California has failed to do. We've all heard about how beleaguered the unemployment system is. So that's something, again, where both campaigns are seizing on the same issue, but filtering it through a completely different lens.
It is such fascinating stuff. Lauren Hepler, you cover it so well. Thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for your time.